Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Today is July 31st and we are now officially past the MLB trade deadline. So we're going to be giving you some lists of winners and losers from the deadline, trying to get to as many deals as we can. Ended up becoming a very action-packed deadline by the end there, so we are going to be breaking that down. Additionally, just yesterday we got the news on the NFL front that the Chicago Bears have decided to extend wide receiver DJ Moore to a new contract extension, so we'll be talking about that and some of the other updates that have come out of NFL training camp as of late. Additionally, we are going to be continuing on with our previews for all 32 NFL teams. Today we are beginning with the AFC West, so we will be covering the Denver Broncos and how Sean Payton, with this new reiteration of the Broncos team, will look in what is perceived to be a transition year, but still could have maybe a little bit of upside and underlying accomplishments in that. And then to wrap up the show, we'll be coming back around to the deadline, and I will be discussing my Boston Red Sox, who I'm a fan of, and the moves that they made over the deadline, whether or not it is enough for them to remain competitive. But before we get into everything, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports as we try and make the show as interactive as possible. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. Last night at 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern, we saw the conclusion of the MLB trade deadline. A bunch of moves taking place this summer. Didn't end up getting quite as much action, specifically in the starting pitcher front as we sort of anticipated, but one of the biggest, I would say, definitely on the pitching front, the biggest move that was done was the Los Angeles Dodgers, who I consider to be a winner coming out of this year's deadline. They acquired a number of different names: Jack Flaherty, Tommy Edman, Ahmed Rosario, Michael Kopech, and Kevin Kiermaier, all to add to what is already a first-place team in their division as it is. I've talked about this in the past. I think it is the Phillies and the Dodgers that are really the top two in the MLB right now in terms of, sort of running away World Series odds, but still a lot of season to go, of course. And sometimes in the Dodgers case, that hasn't necessarily been a great thing, because we've seen over the course of the past couple seasons, this season included, they've been dealing with numerous injuries to players from their starting rotation, and it has ended up being an obstacle for them to overcome. But they come out of this trade deadline with probably the best starting pitcher that was moved in Jack Flaherty from the Detroit Tigers. They got a little bit of everything in this at this trade deadline, but getting Flaherty helps to be a top-end rotation player. Again, maybe the only one that was moved this season. And, for the most part, the Dodgers feel like they can have some of those top-end guys when fully healthy, but obviously, Ohtani isn't pitching this year. Yamamoto has been dealing with injuries for the past month or so, and along with a number of other players for them. Tyler Glasnow finally back now. Was okay, got roughed up a little bit yesterday in what was a disappointing loss for the Dodgers against the Padres. The Padres, another team that we're going to be diving into, but I also thought that on top of the pitching, they got some pretty nice depth to their lineup. Ahmed Rosario has been an above-average hitter this season. Playing for the Rays, he's hitting .307 with a 113 OPS plus, so the Dodgers were able to acquire him. Tommy Edman is another name that I think could be a real X factor for the Dodgers, considering he's an X factor because you also don't necessarily know. He's yet to step foot onto an MLB field this year. Acquired from the Cardinals, he had surgery during the offseason on his wrist. During his rehab stint, he suffered a setback with an ankle soreness injury. So this is a player that is a former Gold Glove winner, provides experience in the infield and the outfield. He is, just about an average bat, which is kind of no complaints there when you talk about the Dodgers, who were in need for a little bit of depth. So getting those type of utility men is definitely a positive for them. And ultimately, I thought that all things considered, they didn't even have to pay that much in terms of prospect price to get all of these deals done, which the same cannot be said for their division rival in the San Diego Padres, where I am also going to slot them into a winner category here because they got better 100%. They end up adding Tanner Scott and Jason Adam. You look at the Padres, and they might be one of the, if not the best bullpen in the MLB now. Also understanding that from the perspective of the Padres here, they already have Robert Suarez, who can definitely eat up some of those high leverage situations as well. I mean, Tanner Scott, in my opinion, is pitching just about as good as anybody is currently. So he was one of the pieces I was most intrigued to see whether or not he ended up getting moved, and he did. So he goes to the Padres. Really interesting little arc here that's been taking place with the Padres after the past couple of years, where they have been so high spending. They look to cut back on payroll a little bit, but they find themselves in a very competitive position here in the National League. And like I said, the Phillies and the Dodgers are the two teams that sort of feel like the obstacles in the way. But outside of that, you can make an argument that it is a very open pennant chase this year. So, the Padres end up making some moves to get themselves better today, but it did cost them a number of high-end prospects for them. And I consider them a winner, maybe more of a slight winner, but don't love doing the cross-sports comparisons, but just this past year in the NBA, we saw the Dallas Mavericks mortgage a lot of their future draft assets to try and build up on their current roster, that they felt like they were in the mix, and that ultimately there was a pretty open opportunity for them. And I kind of feel like that can be said the same a little bit for the Padres. Now, obviously, we look back at that trade deadline for the Mavericks in the NBA so much higher because of the fact that they just went to the NBA Finals. So that's going to be a little bit of a similar curve here that we are going to keep in mind when talking about how we will ultimately look back on this trade deadline for the Padres. But they're trying to gear up for a playoff run. Fernando Tatis, it sounds like he is rearing towards being able to play again sometime soon, but sometime soon in August, but we'll have to see on that end. I do think that the Padres have a very good roster, so we'll see on that front. A couple slight winners that I do want to point out as well. I'll give some credit to the Arizona Diamondbacks, so far very NL West heavy in these winners so far, but that's because I think, these top three teams made some moves that legitimately made them better this season. The Diamondbacks got a couple bullpen arms to help them out in AJ Puck and Dylan Floro. They just basically at the last minute were able to pull off a trade for Josh Bell, which is a big-time pickup in terms of their offense. We see they're starting to play after what was a little bit of a slow start to the season. They're starting to play some really good baseball. The comeback win on Monday night, just yesterday, winning 17-0 against the Nationals. I think that the Diamondbacks are a team that again, haven't gotten a ton of coverage so far this year, but could potentially look to be another, sneaky team going on to make a run once again. So I would put them in the category of a slight winner. You can't not look at what Jazz Chisholm Jr. is doing for the Yankees right now and feel like that was an incredible fit in there. And when you look at their lineup now that they have Jazz and that Giancarlo Stanton is back, when we talk about rounding out this lineup and having it be more well-balanced, Gleyber Torres hitting first, Juan Soto, Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, Jazz Chisholm Jr., I would specifically look at the 2 through 5 there that feel like any one of them can take you deep. Torres having a down season offensively, but has been a productive bat for a number of years. Volpe has been pretty hot since the All-Star break. We saw the flash early on in the season. Whatever he can emerge as would be a positive. So offensively, I do think that the Yankees got better, and Jazz fits a couple different needs there. Eventually, still hitting 5th as he is today. The Yankees are currently beating the Phillies 4-3 with a chance to sweep the best team in baseball. And you also add in a nice little pickup of Mark Leiter Jr., who has been, I talked about it before, I love that pickup when they made it yesterday. We got to see Leiter's debut with the Yankees last night. I believe he pitched the 10th inning when they went into extra innings. It was one of those extra inning situations, was able to escape there without giving up any runs. I thought he looked good there. So I would throw the Yankees into a winners category as well. And then very quickly here, I like that the Pirates ended up making some sort of deals here. Again, nothing crazy necessarily. We are talking about the Pittsburgh Pirates, so definitely lower expectations in that regard. But they make a couple moves here of trading for Brian De La Cruz from the Marlins and Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, so definitely good there. Also, I guess while I bring up the Marlins, I was a little bit harsh on them yesterday, talking about the enormous amounts of talent that they've sent out the door via trade over the past 7 years or so, but ultimately they ended up getting a lot of good prospect return. And considering the fact that, no, you feel like it hurts to see the Marlins sell off these pieces once again, and that they're sort of gutting their major league roster, but at this point, they made that push last year. They make the playoffs. They end up losing in the wild card round, and they were never going to be competitive this season. So you know what? If you're going to cash out, again, it's just the big to be determined is what ends up playing out here for the Marlins in terms of what these players actually become for them. But I got to give them credit for the way that they were able to get a number of, top prospects in return for all of the guys that they traded off. A couple pitchers in there as well. Already mentioned Tanner Scott, but Trevor Rogers as well. They ended up making out pretty well for themselves. Running out of time here, so some quick losers that I will throw into the conversation. I don't think that there were any teams. The teams that I was most frustrated with were the ones, like I talked about, the Marlins didn't want to be treading water in some middle ground. Those teams that didn't end up making deals, that's where my frustrations came. The Angels, the White Sox, the Athletics. Now, a lot of these, players that they have, you feel like they could at least come back around in the winter and end up striking a deal there. I'll give the White Sox some sort of defense a little bit, considering the fact that Garrett Crochet didn't make anything easy with the terms that he was throwing out there to other teams that he was likely going to refuse going into the bullpen for the remainder of this season. If he's going to be pitching in the postseason, he needs to have a new contract extension on the books. So the White Sox, I do give a little bit of a pass here, but the Angels and the Athletics, I just feel like they are these two teams that just, again, hovering in no man's land. The Athletics, it felt like even more so that they were sort of acting under the idea that they understand they are going to be relocating and that they want to draw in fans for when they move into Sacramento before they ultimately make the move to Vegas. So they wanted to be able to almost sell tickets. Mason Miller is a big-time name at this point, was in contention for Rookie of the Year in the American League before he ended up fracturing his finger when he hit a table and ended up putting himself on the 15-day IL. So that move kind of almost took Miller out of trade candidacy at that point. But with Brent Rooker, I mean, he's a great player. I would also want to, have him on my team if I'm the Athletics from the fun perspective. I think he's an incredible player. All-Star last year, has improved on his All-Star campaign. He's currently slashing .297, .372, .965. That can't be right. That's got to be his OPS. Looking at my notes here, but OPS plus of 174. He has, he's been incredible for them, but also at the same time, he's going to be turning 30 next season, and it feels like now is the time to strike in terms of getting a return for him. And we don't exactly know necessarily what was going behind the scenes there as to what types of packages they were hearing in return for Brent Rooker. It sounded like, according to ESPN's Jeff Passan, that they were reluctant to trade him anyways, and ultimately they just sort of stay put. And just a little bit disappointing there. A lot of those same points you can make for the Angels as well, who had a few, specifically bats that could have ended up, making a splash somewhere else. But the last loser I'll throw into this category is the Houston Astros, and it's very slight because acquiring Yusei Kikuchi does a little bit fill out a need for them in terms of having another starting pitcher. So I'm not going to necessarily kill the addition of him to their roster, but I also feel like at the same time, with the amount of prospect value that you gave up, and he is going to be a rental for them, that it is, definitely a very steep price. You wonder what's going on behind the scenes there in terms of, do the Astros feel like there is a window closing? We saw them get out to such a slow start at the beginning of this year, and I wonder if maybe they think that that is a sign of what's to come. Not really sure, but they also didn't really add any bats to that offense as well, which is playing a lot better as of late, but I feel like they could have gone for an upgrade there. But let me know what you think in the comments section as far as winners and losers. But we are going to be switching gears now because yesterday we got the announcement that DJ Moore has agreed to a contract extension with the Chicago Bears. So we're going to be diving into that and what it means for the Bears this upcoming season, and not just this season, but years to come with the development of Caleb Williams as well. So we will get into all of that, but first a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the face shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some losing shit. It's stupid if you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. As during all of the MLB trade deadline drama that was taking place on Tuesday afternoon, we also got the news that the Chicago Bears are signing wide receiver DJ Moore to a lucrative extension. The deal is 4 years for $110 million. It includes $82.6 million guaranteed. So pretty substantial marks here for DJ Moore, who has definitely emerging as a franchise wide receiver. You know, he was sort of hovering on that top 10 receiver conversation. I think that's around where he is headed into this year. And he has a chance to, headed into the prime seasons of his career, end up really making a name for himself. This is a proactive move from the Bears, so a little bit surprising considering the fact that Moore just signed a new contract extension with the Panthers when he was with them. I believe it was in the 2022 offseason, or that's at least when that contract extension kicked in. And now he is locked in with Chicago through 2029. They sort of he almost jumped the line a little bit in terms of the different players that are going to be on expiring deals sooner than DJ Moore. But we saw from what the Bears put out last season that overall, I do think that when you look at the effect and the impact that DJ Moore had on the Chicago Bears last season, and not just on the Bears, but specifically on that quarterback position, it was Justin Fields. They went out, they traded for DJ Moore with the number 1 overall pick in last year's draft. And obviously, we're now looking at a new quarterback situation in Chicago with Caleb Williams. But even with DJ Moore present, Justin Fields was able to turn out the best season of his career up to this point. And now he is coming into a situation here with Caleb Williams where from day one, he should be able to help Caleb Williams establish himself in the league. The Bears have also been very proactive just in terms of trying to make sure that they get this quarterback conversation right. Head coach Matt Eberflus already knows that his job basically depends on the success of Caleb Williams. He's not going to survive a quarterback turnover for a second time, so he's trying to do everything he can to make this one count with Caleb Williams. He drafted Rome Odunze as well with the 9th overall pick, and it is a very talented offense surrounding Caleb Williams, specifically on the front of DJ Moore last year. He had 1,364 yards. He had 8 touchdowns. He had his highest catch rate of his career, pulled in over 70% of his targets, which was the best mark of his career. And he has been a just transformative player for Chicago in his brief time here. We have a comment here from Shots Below the Belt. Does this signing reflect confidence of the Chicago Bears heading into the season? Because they do also have Keenan Allen. That's an excellent point. I mentioned Rome Odunze, but it obviously doesn't stop there as well. The Bears have been adding a number of different receivers into the mix. They signed DeAndre Swift as well in the backfield, who is, somewhere around a top 10, 15 running back in the NFL. So I do think that the Bears are going to be, I think that it is a sign of confidence, and we have comments from Anthony as well. I'll get to your baseball question at the end of this segment, but Anthony does also say the one weakness that the Bears have is their offensive line, which is true. Definitely, it is the weaker part of their offense, but I do still feel like it's at least improved, that they have made some moves as of late. When you look at the difference in situations from when Justin Fields began his career in Chicago in 2021 to where the Bears are now, there's a number of far more impressive options around them. It's where they go out and they draft a Darnell Wright, they bring in Tevin Jenkins, and I think that ultimately, it's definitely not an area of strength, I would say, that offensive line, but I do think that they have the chance at least to continue to develop, and at this point, just being league average, especially with all of those weapons that Caleb Williams is surrounded with. And Caleb Williams, for whatever it's worth as well, is a quarterback that has shown his ability to use his legs while he was at USC. Almost a little Justin Fields-ish in some degrees. One of the main criticisms of him does sort of also reflect one of the concerns with Justin Fields when he was in Chicago. And that's the idea of holding onto the ball too long. Now, Caleb Williams, when he was at college, I do feel like he also, at that point, especially in USC, in his final season, it was his junior year, but he sort of knew that he had to make these big-time plays and make the superstar types of plays because of the fact that the defense wasn't good. There wasn't quite as much necessarily as help in the receiving department as he used to have, but I think he is going to definitely be able to find his way in Chicago. And again, we'll get to the rest of the comments here in one moment, but just sort of wrapping up the idea on DJ Moore himself, I do think that this is very well spent money for Chicago, considering the fact that he is a player that at this point, and this may be a little bit unfair of me to say, but we haven't seen DJ Moore really have any issues in terms of run-ins with quarterbacks. It feels like he's been very drama-free, considering the fact that he's never won more than 7 games in his first 6 seasons of his career. That he has had some pretty bad quarterback play surrounding him for a number of these years, and the fact that he's sort of remained as cool as he has and he's been extremely available, and durability is honestly one of the biggest things I'm looking to pay for when I'm in the NFL. He's got the talent, he's got the durability, it seems like he's going to have the leadership. Now, that will be put to the test maybe a little bit more now that there are so many other options around him. He was really the sole guy in Carolina for a number of those years. Now with Keenan Allen, who's coming off of underratedly a career season for Keenan Allen last year, and Rome Odunze, who I think eventually is going to, especially once Keenan Allen, he kind of feels like a one-year rental for me. They got him at an extremely low price that Odunze will be able to take over a much bigger role, but there are going to be a lot of mouths to feed. You just have to wonder about, eventually what that buy-in is going to look like. But I feel like everybody will sort of be on board after the kind of messy situations they've been at over the course of the past couple of years, that they'll be able to fortify themselves. I believe that they are minus money at this point to make the playoffs, and I'm sort of with that as well because I'm very high on what they have moving forward here. But Anthony Manzano comments, that's the one thing I feel like with Caleb Williams, he's a pocket passer like Aaron Rodgers that can move and use his feet, but he's a pocket passer. I agree. He definitely has that mobility to him, and it's a weapon. I almost look at the perfect modernized version, and by no means am I comparing him here, but Patrick Mahomes is kind of exactly what you're looking for, at least what I'm looking for, in a quarterback where you rely on the arm talent. That is your go-to weapon. But we've seen Mahomes a number of times throughout his career in these past few postseasons that he's able to create a run, pick up 20 yards on the ground when need be, on third downs at least be a threat to scramble out. And that's what I feel like the best version of Caleb Williams could look like. Again, not saying he's Patrick Mahomes by any means, but that's sort of the archetype that you would like to see, and Aaron Rodgers does sort of fit in that same conversation as well, and that's something that I could conceivably see from Caleb Williams, is having the arm talent first, but also having the understanding of, not just being able to use his legs, but understanding when the right time is. And That's something where when you look at Justin Fields, he was basically in a point where he was reliant on his legs to some degree. And I liked what Justin Fields was able to put on the field in 2023. But ideally, yes, with, as Anthony also said, Justin would use his legs because pressure would break through a lot sooner than preferable. As soon as there was, any sense of pressure, Justin Fields, especially in that 2022 season, he was just taking off immediately. It's being able to keep your eyes downfield as you navigate, and that's a lot to ask of a quarterback, of course, but again, I do think that Caleb Williams has the tools to be able to do so. Shots Below the Belt says, having speed at wideout will help both the offensive line and quarterback. Great receivers means quicker throws. And I do think that's something that might take a little bit of adjustment for Caleb Williams, because a lot of the time we did see him sort of going for those home run plays. Just getting Caleb to understand, trusting the process, trusting the offense, and being able to make those quick decisions. I think that's something that he might be a little bit bumpy out of the gates with, but I feel like, again, with all of the tools that he has, I'm a very high believer. I know that's not a hot take by any means, but I do feel like to some degree towards the end of his USC career, and as he was getting all of this buzz coming into the number 1 overall pick, people started trying to poke holes in Caleb Williams, but I do think that he has a chance to, live up to the expectations. Shot says, Justin Fields was sort of set up to fail. Totally agree there. He continues, the dude was running for his life, never had a running game, and half the time didn't even have an elite target. Didn't have that elite target until DJ Moore came in, which is why clearly the Bears were so set on trying to make sure that they did have a legitimate number 1 option. As much as we feel like Rome Odunze, at least personally, I feel like he is eventually going to be, one of those go-to wide receivers. Keenan Allen coming off of a career year, but we've seen this before with him in terms of the availability, and the injuries have definitely been big obstacles for him to overcome. So, I like the Keenan Allen pickup. Not to be, pessimistic or anything, but if he did end up getting hurt, I feel like it's good to just make sure that you have, Keenan Allen's almost a better number 2 option than he is a number 1, and you can definitely debate who's the better wide receiver fully healthy, DJ Moore or Keenan Allen, but DJ Moore, it's clear the Bears are investing into him as their true number 1 option. But we additionally saw it, it's not just Justin Fields, where absolutely, yes, his situation coming into the league was a bit of a disaster, but even if you go a little bit before, and listen, I was never a Mitchell Trubisky guy, but you saw during those years as well, Mitchell Trubisky, and that's when, at the same time, the Bears were bringing in Nick Foles as well. I think they had Andy Dalton at one point, trying to make them work. None of them were ever able to get comfortable in their situation because of the fact that the offensive line was a disaster. So at that point, Trubisky was almost their best opportunity because he was a little bit more mobile. Anthony says, coming from the perspective of a Dolphins fan, they over-relied on Tyreek and Jalen Waddle the last 2 seasons because of the offensive line and became one-dimensional. I do think that Mike McDaniel has, especially last year, we started to see the development of the run game as well, and some of the, improvements there. Going after Raheem Mostert, Devin Achane end up being, a speedster as well out of the backfield. But yeah, I do think that, it takes a couple adjustments as this goes on as well. And the run game is probably something that eventually that's going to be the next step for the Bears. But at the same time, the offensive line is going to need to get better. They kind of have a good number of running back options as well behind DeAndre Swift, where Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson are some pretty nice backup running backs as well. So they have a number of different looks that they could maybe, end up throwing out there, but the offensive line is going to need to hold up to even have that be a possibility. And then we will address the last comment here from Anthony. Hopefully, in terms of the Miami comparison, hopefully that doesn't happen with Chicago, where you're over-relying on the speed receivers to the point of using routes that cater to them when defenses can shut you down. I do think that eventually the Bears are going to be able to add a couple different layers here. Now, we'll obviously have to see there, especially with Caleb Williams in year one. They're probably going to have that base offense and just make sure that he's comfortable from day one. And then from there, I think you start to add on to the other parts of it. But I think that the Bears have done a very good job of rounding out their roster. Super quickly here, because I don't want to fully blow by it here, but at the beginning of the segment, Anthony did comment, do you agree with most of the major people who cover the MLB saying that the Marlins won the trade deadline when it comes to sellers? Again, I think I was a little bit, I do think that they came away with a ton of prospects, considering that they understood the situation that they were in. They decided that they weren't just going to stay in middle ground. They ended up pulling the trigger on these deals, and sure, it's been a lot of talent headed out those doors in Miami over the past handful of seasons, but especially with the way that the MLB is currently configured and the fact that it is a seller's market, that there were so many teams that felt like they were in a competitive stance that they could make a move. I do think the Marlins made out pretty well, and I would give them the overall tag of being a winner. But I'm talking about the Bears and this DJ Moore contract. We are going to be going a little bit broader here. We do have some updates in terms of the Bears strategy for the Hall of Fame game, which is going to be taking place tomorrow night. So close on that NFL season. So we'll be touching on that, some of the other preseason updates as to who will and will not be playing in preseason, and some injuries and retirements that have taken place over the past 24 hours. So a whole lot of NFL training camp stories to break down. We will do all of that, but first a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We were just talking about the DJ Moore extension with the Chicago Bears. The Bears are set to play in the Hall of Fame game, which takes place tomorrow night. So you can smell the football in the air. We really are so close in that final stretch of the offseason. Really exciting there. But unfortunately, we are not going to get our first look at the Caleb Williams rendition of this offense tomorrow night. Head coach Matt Eberflus announced that they do not have any plans to start any of their starters for tomorrow night. It sounds like eventually the plan is to have, I think the rep range that they were looking at for Caleb Williams was 55 to 65. I saw on ESPN that that's supposedly the range that they were looking at, considering that's where some of the first round picks from last year, how much experience they got in the preseason. So ultimately, we will see on that front in terms of when we will get to see Caleb Williams. It's sort of TBD on the week 2 game, which I want to say is against the Colts, but I could have that mistaken, and ultimately, not all of that important. Ultimately, it's against the Bills, but, I do think that it is probably the right decision for the Bears on that front. We additionally saw that Aaron Rodgers is not going to be playing, at least in the first preseason game. This I 100% agree with. We were talking in a production meeting earlier with the whole GSMC team, and our boss threw out to us that the idea of, could the Aaron Rodgers deal end up being the worst trade in NFL history? And anytime you throw out those types of conversations, it feels like a little bit of hyperbole, but if Aaron Rodgers were to get hurt early in this year and call it quits from there, it would ultimately be pretty devastating as a whole. And I do feel like, eventually Rodgers is going to play, and that won't have to be an issue, but you don't want to take any risks here for the Jets, because at that point, if Rodgers were to go down again, this season becomes lost once again, and it feels like an entire reset comes from there. So I definitely stand with the Jets in terms of the Aaron Rodgers front of whether or not he plays in the preseason. Now, there have been a series of videos that have been circulating from Jets training camp of him having some words with some of his receivers, notably Garrett Wilson, and a lot of people are sort of putting a lot of stock into that. I'm not really there with it at that point. Now, these are things that are going to take place, especially when you're talking about Aaron Rodgers, who is always going to demand greatness out of the players that he's around. But it did seem like him and Garrett Wilson were developing a really good rapport during last year's training camps, and obviously ends up getting cut short with Rodgers going down. But I'm definitely not on the panic train in terms of that by any means, but was something, at least somewhat notable there. But some contract holdout situations, the Matthew Judon saga that we covered a couple days ago, sounds like it is progressively getting worse for the Patriots there, considering the fact that Judon, he was at practice a few days ago in sweatpants, not participating. Just a day later, he ended up coming into the Patriots facilities and got in what was reported as a, quote, animated discussion with Gerard Mayo and members of the front office, and then yesterday he was a no-show altogether. So, seems to be getting worse here. Matthew Judon is looking for a new contract extension. We talked about this the other day. While he does have himself to blame to some degree in terms of the fact that he's only making $6.5 million this year because of the fact that he chose to restructure his deal to push up some of that money. The overall, annual value of that contract that he signed ahead of 2021, it is clear that he is still one of the more underpaid players. There is some sort of risk involved, considering just last year he tore his bicep and was out from week 4 on. But I still do think that in his, early 30s, he will be able to have probably maximize the next 3-4 years as a top-end defensive end. He had double-digit sacks in the last 2 full seasons that he played. I threw out the idea of giving him an incentive-based restructure this season that would tie into games played and overall number of sacks to try and at least, show some sort of reward if things pan out there. But it doesn't seem like Judon is going to be on the Patriots for much longer, which is a little bit unfortunate for the Patriots, considering he's been just about their best player the past few years, but also, for whatever it's worth, the bar's been pretty low on that end as well. So we'll have to see how all of that plays out. We still have some hold-in situations. Haven't covered yet that Trent Williams is also looking for a new contract extension and that he is holding out from 49ers training camp. Trent Williams is a little bit of an interesting one considering where he's at in his career, now 35, 36 years old. And to be fair, just turned 36 years old. And to be fair, he's coming off of 3 straight All-Pro first team selections. So he still feels like he's at the peak of his powers. And we've seen, offensive linemen be able to go a little bit later in the season as well. But that is sort of a wrinkle that I wasn't necessarily anticipating. We've been hearing about Brandon Ayuk all offseason long, but, I'm sure the 49ers would have preferred to have all of this offseason go a little bit smoother considering they're coming off of this Super Bowl appearance. And, I do feel like to some degree this is the season for them to really cash in where they have all of their players under contract. And once Brock Purdy's new deal kicks in, assuming they do end up paying him, which I would be very surprised at this point if they don't. But once that happens, they're going to have to, cut some costs elsewhere on the roster. This is an open NFC, and they probably have a great chance. And, open NFC, I will just quickly here address a comment from Shots Below the Belt where he says, I smell about 3 or 4 wins for the Giants this season. It's interesting. I haven't been able to look fully at their schedule. We're going to quickly here. I've been using Sharp Football Analysis. No free ads or anything, but it is free. And I feel like I like the algorithm they use in terms of balancing out the ultimate schedules here. Giants are looking at 6.5 wins per the schedule, the 20th hardest schedule in the league. So, 3 feels probably a little disrespectful, but... And I also, I like Brian Daboll as a coach, so I will stand by him there. It's not a very talented roster overall, specifically on that offensive end, but I don't want to dig myself too deep into any holes here with Giants fans before really getting to, look at the entire picture for them. So appreciate the comment, but I'm going to leave that one at that. But a couple notes here on the rookie quarterback front. It sounds like Caleb Williams is garnering a ton of respect around the locker room, and that people are really impressed with how quickly he's been able to show out up to this point, and that he is, it's really no question whatsoever. It never really was going to be a question in terms of whether or not he is the week 1 guy, but he has surpassed expectations up to that point. He seems like he is gearing towards a potential... And I'm not one for, sort of overreacting or anything, but based off of the weapons that are around him and the talent that I do think he has, I do think that Caleb Williams could potentially have an all-time rookie season. CJ Stroud had debatably the best rookie season from a quarterback of all time last year, and I think that he can put up, similar production with, granted, more around him, but I'm very high on that hype train. But coming back around to the Patriots here, first couple days of padded practice have not been very impressive for their 3rd overall pick, Drake May, which is definitely disappointing to hear on that front. Now, at the same time, it's just a couple days into training camp. You can't put too much stock into it, but the idea right now is that Jacoby Brissett is significantly ahead of him, and it would take a little bit of an upset to see Drake May as the week 1 starting quarterback. I didn't think that it was in their best interest anyways to have him start week 1, but, everybody's now making the comparisons to the draft analysis that Bill Belichick gave about the sloppy footwork and sort of the negative opinions on Drake May. It sounds like some of those are sort of playing out a little bit. Now, again, the Patriots, as long as Jacoby Brissett is healthy, aren't going to need him from week 1, and the idea is probably that, this team is going to try and rely on their defense a little bit more to establish this culture. we'll see on that front as well, but I think that, the more we go on here, the more I would not be surprised if Drake May doesn't play his rookie season. If the Patriots can be in the mix, I think there's straight out a chance that he never comes in. I would imagine maybe, the back end of the schedule, maybe week 14, 15, somewhere along those lines is where we could see him make his debut, but we will have to see on that front. I know that was sort of a lot of information thrown out all at once. It's a slow Wednesday here, so just sort of picking up on all of the little different things that we heard. Did also see Rashad Penny retire yesterday, just to throw some extra, content in there, but we're going to refocus here, and we are going to be continuing on with our season previews of all 32 NFL teams. Today we have our first of the AFC West teams to dive into with the Denver Broncos. It's a new era here. Sean Payton, a little bit of a, I wouldn't say a hot seat because of how much money they're paying him and all of the turnover that's happened, but I would say that there is a significant amount of pressure on Sean Payton in these next couple seasons for the sake of his legacy, considering everything that happened. So we're going to discuss that and what could be coming up for the Broncos this upcoming season. But before we do so, we have to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are continuing on with our season previews. We're now moving on to the AFC West. And first off, we have the Denver Broncos. And it was a loud second half of the season into the offseason, while there was a little bit of a dispute between head coach Sean Payton and quarterback Russell Wilson. Ultimately, Sean Payton ended up winning the battle in terms of surviving in Denver, and I think that ultimately, it was sort of understandable on his part. I know during this offseason, the further we get away, people are sort of turning to the overall stats that don't look all that bad with Russell Wilson, and the fact that they were in wild card contention while he was the starting quarterback. But I've made my thoughts clear on this before. I thought that had a lot more to do with the defense really generating tons of turnovers and opportunities for Russell Wilson that I don't think were all that sustainable. They won the turnover battle in 5 straight games as they went on that win streak. During the win streak, they were plus 13 in the turnover differential, which you do have to give some credit to Russell Wilson for not turning the ball over. But again, it's not like their offense was doing incredible things with all of those opportunities anyways. But all that being said, I do feel like, especially with the way that all played out, it ended up becoming very public of Sean Payton almost trying to, I don't think blackmail would be the right terminology, but Russell Wilson giving back some of the money to the franchise, otherwise he would get benched. And the way that Russell Wilson sort of came out and made all of that public, it was not a very good look for Sean Payton. And even if I think that he was right in terms of not believing in Russell Wilson, he ran him out of town, and the Broncos are still on the hook for a significant amount of money and dead cap because of that Russell Wilson deal, which granted Sean Payton wasn't a part of when they brought him in. So that is on the general manager in that perspective. But I do think that there's some real pressure on Sean Payton in the coming seasons, where maybe not necessarily quite as much this year. We know this is a transition season. But for Sean Payton, he's going to be a Hall of Fame coach when it's all said and done anyways. But at the same time, this could end up being a really tough mark on his overall career. And he's always going to have the New Orleans years, but this could end up being messy. But he seems to be confident in the new quarterback that he drafted this year in Bo Nix. The Broncos took Nix with the 12th overall pick. And I think that, for Sean Payton, it's just about trying to establish an identity here, specifically offensively, and seeing the vision. I don't think it necessarily helps Sean Payton, again, in terms of this legacy conversation, which can be so overplayed at times, but ESPN's Adam Schefter also did have the report on draft night that as Sean Payton and the Broncos were deciding to draft Bo Nix, that Payton, quote, feels as strongly about Bo Nix as he did Mahomes. And there's all these stories about how during the 2017 draft, Sean Payton, they weren't in the market for a quarterback at that point, with Drew Brees still playing good enough football, and they weren't at the top of the draft. But this idea that he was all in on Mahomes and he saw the vision there, and I think that that's a little bit ridiculous, but, that's besides the point. But to have that quote come out, I mean, Bo Nix was ultimately the 6th quarterback taken off the board here, and the expectations, I don't think, should be all too high for Bo Nix, someone who played 5 years in college, and, especially those early on years at Auburn, I do think almost hurt his draft pedigree more than they should, in terms of people can't really get some of those rough Auburn years out of their minds. But Bo Nix was really good by the end with Oregon, so it's going to be interesting to watch. And he comes into an offense that was pretty mediocre last season, like we already talked about. Now, I actually feel like I'm a little bit higher on the wide receiver core than a lot of people. Courtland Sutton is a very nice, number one option there. Not elite, I would say, but gave you at least, the reliability, and he was definitely a red zone threat for them. I think he scored 8 touchdowns last year, somewhere along those lines. Could have even been more. But, Courtland Sutton, a pretty nice option for them. And then they have, outside of that, he ended up with 10 touchdowns last year, Sutton did. But they have some other intriguing pieces. Marvin Mims flashed some promise in his rookie season last year. Tim Patrick, if he can finally stay healthy, more so, he's had a couple 700-plus yard seasons in his career. They signed Josh Reynolds to a deal in free agency, 2 years, $14 million. They also drafted Nix's number one option at Oregon in Troy Franklin. So, lists of some solid names. Again, a lot to be proven with the majority of them, but a group that I can see some upside with. I also feel like Greg Dulcich is a tight end option who could end up having a breakout year. Was pretty good in his rookie season, but sophomore year dealt with a ton of injuries. So we'll see what he ends up turning into. The offensive line is actually pretty good, above average. They lose Lloyd Cushenberry in free agency, their starting center from last season. They bring in Sam Mustipher to try and be his replacement. Not a ton of experience there, so their offensive line likely gets worse from last year, but at the same time, I do feel like, it's still going to be a positive unit on that offensive line, and they can, hold their own. Now, running backs behind that offensive line, not really a great feeling there. Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, Jaleel McLaughlin. It is pretty mediocre. They did draft Audric Estime out of Notre Dame, who Estime, if you watched any college football, I mean, he was kind of a beast, but not really much of a threat in the pass game at all, and we'll see if he ever ends up amounting to anything. They took him, double check here, they took him in the 5th round, I think it was. Yeah, it was the 5th round, 147th pick, so it is, again, a pretty lackluster roster as a whole, I would say. Shots Below the Belt says, after Peyton Manning retired, the Broncos haven't really been much of a threat, known for a strong running game and lockdown defense. And yeah, it's that they don't have an identity at this point, because the run game, like I just alluded to, that's been gone. The defense that was once elite, one of the best that we've seen in the 21st century, led by Von Miller, that's not the same anymore. You look at the statistics from last season, and they were not good at all. This is, of course, the team that allowed 70 points to the Dolphins early on in the year, and they ended up getting clowned on for. They do have a solid pass rush for whatever it's worth. Zach Allen, Jonathan Cooper, Baron Browning could all be some breakout names this upcoming year. They'll have their opportunities to do so. But outside of Pat Surtain in the secondary, there really aren't any names that jump off of the page at you. And they ended up losing a couple big-time defenders where they lost Justin Simmons. Justin Simmons is still an unsigned free agent, but it does not sound likely that he's going to make his way back to Denver. And then Josie Jewell ended up signing a contract with the Carolina Panthers. So, again, already a pretty lackluster roster, losing 2 of their best defensive players. Not a great sign there. Ultimately, as much as I mentioned earlier, they were incredible in terms of the turnover differential during those weeks. It was 7 through 12 when they won those 5 straight games last year. They won the turnover differential by 13 at that point. And, turnover luck is a real thing in my eyes, and that's kind of what it would take, again, for this Broncos defense to be spectacular. But, looking at their overall schedule, the Broncos don't have it easy for them. Specifically, I would say the first and second parts of the first few weeks and the final stretch are both, overall pretty tough, I would say. You look at maybe those week 5, week 6 games at home against some division rivals is probably where you're looking at first win of the year. Not to be, overly negative on them, but they have a difficult schedule as a whole. 25th, I guess it would be 25th easiest, which, reverse mathing it there, that would be the 8th hardest schedule in the league, something along those lines. So they're going to have a lot cut out for them. But like I was talking about before, this is more about just seeing an actual vision with this roster and sort of finding that identity once again, because that's definitely seemed to be lost. And you look at the opponents on their schedule, having to, of course, play the Chiefs twice. You get the Ravens in there as well. The NFC South is at least a division that you feel like maybe with some home games you could take, but Broncos, I am not very optimistic on in terms of wins and losses this year, but that doesn't mean it's a bad year. The Broncos could benefit from being towards the top of the draft next season and being able to, add another star player at wherever they end up needing at that point. It's not like it's the strongest quarterback draft anyways. If things are completely disastrous with Bo Nix, then who knows, but I anticipate that he's probably going to play the entire first season. He's going to have some good enough receiver options and a good enough offensive line that I think that he can, show us if he is ever going to have anything. Ultimately, though, I do have the Broncos winning just 4 games. I would definitely not be surprised if they end up rattling off a couple more. I don't feel great about slotting them into 4. Their overall underline is 5.5 right now. So I have them going under. I think that it's going to take a little bit of time for whatever this next iteration is to, fully come to form. I feel like they could potentially be an interesting team, if they were to get involved. Even, again, I really want to see them have a running back and sort of, again, getting back to what we have viewed the Broncos as for a while, which is a team that can have a good enough defense and a run game, but that hasn't been the case as of late. Looking at how they stack up to the other teams that we've done season projections for so far, tied with the Titans for the worst record. Again, 4 wins. I could see Sean Payton, again, if he is going to establish himself that the game hasn't passed him by and that they are going to be able to become more of a threat once again, I could see Sean Payton keeping them more competitive for the year, but I just feel like with that schedule they have, it's going to be very difficult. But let me know what your thoughts are on the Broncos' upcoming season. We are going to be taking our final break of the show, though, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be coming back around to the MLB trade deadline, and I'm going to be talking about the Boston Red Sox and the moves they made and ultimately how they fared. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where the MLB trade deadline was yesterday, of course, and I'm going to be diving into the Boston Red Sox. This is my team, so, sort of giving a little bit of an insider's perspective here, and ultimately, this is a franchise that the trust with the fan base has been tarnished over the course of the past few years with the way that they have not been treating themselves as a big market franchise. But, they ended up making a change in terms of leadership this offseason, fired Chaim Bloom, ended up bringing in Craig Breslow to be their president of baseball operations, and this was his first deadline. I thought he made out pretty well, ultimately, all things considered. This was the first time in the past few years that they put some actual effort into buying and trying to improve their roster in the now. They've been doing a little bit of this buying and selling, mixed bag over some of the past couple deadlines, and this year they were willing to move off of prospects, and we'll sort of dive into specifically what that means as we go on here. But in terms of the major league roster, there was a clear priority for the Red Sox to go after pitching, which was definitely a need for them. They end up bringing in a starter in James Paxton, who made his first start for the Red Sox last night. Ultimately not quite the start that I'm sure he dreamed up. 4 1/3 inning pitched, 6 hits, 1 walk, 3 earned runs, 5 strikeouts. only 3 earned runs, but there were 6 scored while he was in the game because his defense really was a mess behind him. They had 3 errors in this game, and they really blew it for him in the 5th inning. He should have at least made it into the 6th, but obviously it was a little bit of a mess behind him, so I thought that his start was fine. Again, unfortunate the way that it played out for him, but I do think that he is going to at least be, a name that you can rely on every 5th day a little bit more than you could in the past. Cooper Criswell gets bumped out of the starting rotation as a result of this, and I've talked about it before. I do actually kind of like Cooper Criswell and the way that he's been pitching, at least as of late. But he gets moved into the bullpen. I was curious whether they were going to send him to the minors and have him sort of work things out there, maybe be an option for them next year. But it sounds like they're going to keep him on the active roster and have him pitch out of the bullpen, which could end up being a nice addition for them, considering we know they very desperately need depth in the bullpen. Last night, he pitched the final 3 innings, and he did so with 0 hits and 0 walks, in what was ultimately, pretty flawless for him. So I think that that's something to feel good about for sure if you are, Criswell, and what this could look like of him out of the bullpen. So that's something that's definitely going to be important to monitor going forward. Not sure how much better you could have really gotten in terms of making a deal for a starting pitcher. Not sure how much more you could have done than James Paxton. Jack Flaherty ended up being really the only more so front-end guy that was moved. But like I mentioned, it was pitching all around, where it was James Paxton, it was 2 bullpen arms in Lucas Sims and Luis Garcia. Garcia moves me a little bit more than Sims does, but either way, it just takes one of them to hit. Now, they're probably going to be put into some situations in terms of leverage that maybe they wouldn't have been receiving if they were on a different team. But the Red Sox, they just need help, especially at this point, while Justin Slayton and Chris Martin are both dealing with injuries. So again, you could see this bullpen actually end up being, again, if one of these guys ends up playing out for them, if Slayton and Martin can stay healthy and, give you solid production, the bullpen could become, significantly stronger. And it's needed, because you look at what happened last night against the Seattle Mariners. Every guy the Mariners rolled out had an ERA under 3. And there might not be anybody on the Red Sox that even, out of the bullpen does even have an ERA under 3. Shots Below the Belt says, as an Angels fan, the deadline gives me Vietnam flashbacks. Last year, the Angels could have traded Ohtani for a haul, but didn't pull the trigger. Then he signs with the Dodgers. So, first off, Angels fan, gotta have some sympathy there. Not that I'm standing on any sort of a high horse right now with the Red Sox, but the Ohtani debate was very interesting at the deadline last year, and I can't 1,000% blame them, but they could have gotten a historic haul in return if they did pull the trigger. So I definitely do feel for you on that one. But additionally, with the Red Sox, they add Sims and Garcia. They then also flipped Nick York, who was once one of the top prospects in the Red Sox farm systems, to go and acquire Quinn Priester, who is sort of, equivalent in terms of getting towards being MLB ready. Priester has made a few appearances in the major leagues through a couple of years here, but still, I believe, just 25 years old. I'd have to double check that one there, but Priester is just a position of need, as opposed to Nick York, who probably would have ultimately... Priester's just 22, actually, so, no, that's not right. He's 23, sorry. But, I think that, York eventually probably would have gotten blocked by the Red Sox. He was Rule 5 eligible, so there was a good chance that he would have been snatched up anyways. So the Red Sox sort of just parlay that into more of a position of need, which is going to get a pitcher, and he can be a little bit of a developmental project there. They did go and they added one bat. Specifically, we talked about how they needed a right-hander. They get Danny Jansen, who did look pretty good in his debut with the Sox on Sunday night against the Yankees. 2 hits and a walk in 4 plate appearances. And they had him be a designated hitter for that game. I am very curious to see how they ultimately decide to even out him and Connor Wong. Wong having an incredible season for them. One of their few right-handed bats already. So it does feel maybe a little bit of being counterproductive, considering you go and you desperately need a right-handed bat you add at the position where you already have one. But I think that it maybe even speaks a little bit to the Red Sox toying around with what the future of this roster looks like. Jansen's just going to be a rental, and he was very cheap to go out and get, so there is that. But also at the same time, when you're talking about Connor Wong, he's been very impressive for them the past couple seasons, but Kyle Teal, who they drafted in the first round of last year's draft, is sort of expected to eventually be the franchise catcher, and this sort of opens up an opportunity for Connor Wong to maybe get some more reps in the infield, which he's been all right when he's done so in the past. And it is an interesting sort of idea of, could they end up having him take over as maybe a second baseman, which they have desperately needed for a number of years now. So I think that ultimately pretty good pickup there as well. And again, they didn't have to give up all too much compensation in terms of the minor leagues. They sent out a number of prospects, which is, sort of unlike them in the past, and almost is encouraging to me that they were actually willing to spend some instead of just sitting on their precious farm system and hoping that, Red Sox fans sort of drink the Kool-Aid on that one. But all of the majority of the guys that they sent out were all Rule 5 draft eligible anyways. So just kind of reset the price a little bit, and they held on to the important, prospects. And I think that they are going to be in a pretty good position going forward, where I talked about the bullpen. Again, Slayton and Martin, when they come back, they're more so your high leverage guys. We will see what happens with Garcia and Sims in terms of whether or not they end up eating up innings at the end of games as well. But it was just very clear that they needed an upgrade there. And then, again, on the note of injuries, you have Tristan Casas making his rehab debut last night. Wasn't very good in it, 0 for 3 in that game, but it's at least, a sign that he's probably on his way back soon. Vaughn Grissom, even though he's been nothing for them, he's expected to start rehab soon. The Red Sox are 2 games out of that last wild card spot, of actually, the last 2 wild card spots, as the Twins and the Royals are both locked up. But I think that, the Red Sox, they got better around the margins. It wasn't a hard buy, but that was never really the expectation for this team, and I don't know if it necessarily would have been fully worth it anyways. I feel like this was headed in the right direction, at least showing that they're not scared to trade prospects. And ultimately for Breslow, I don't think he needed to make some home run deal in his first trade deadline, but let me know if you feel like they didn't do enough, because I know that is sort of a complaint from a number of Red Sox fans. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.